All right. So welcome to the AMP Nashville, which stands for Agile Marketing Professionals joint meetup with new friends that we're making in Agile Denver. We're really delighted to get together and form some new connections and share our passion for Agile together this evening. So welcome all of you. Let's see if I go big, whether you, okay, hopefully y'all are seeing my screen, I hope.
We are.
For just folks who are not familiar with AMP Nashville, like I said, we are an Agile marketing professional group, and we really have kind of like a trifold purpose. We want to help Agile marketing and brand experience professionals to apply Agile ways of working so we can be adaptable and raise quality and all the good stuff that Agile can bring. But another really big impetus behind forming this group is collaboration with others across organizations. So getting out of those marketing departments. Our thought is, if software development and other folks are Agile, well, let's learn about that, and let's talk the same vocabulary, the same language, so that we can understand each other better and then collaborate more effectively. So that whole cooperation and shared values piece is a big part of it. And then ultimately, our big aspirational goal is that as organizations become more effective in the way we work together, that we really optimize the way we work. We're able to amplify innovation, and that's good for the regions, the cities and the areas in which we live. So that is why AMP Nashville came about this past summer. So just a couple things to know. We do welcome all Nashvillians across the world, whether it's Italy or Ontario or the UK. We figure everybody's got a little bit of Nashville in their heart, but in all seriousness, everyone is welcome, whether you are an expert or whether you just happen to be curious about some of these business discipline and marketing type subjects. We meet monthly on the third Wednesday of the month. And we do try to alternate the time some, especially to accommodate some of the international folks. So we'll often meet around the Central Time lunch hour, and then in kind of the early evening, at least in Central Tennessee, it's early evening. And we do try to walk the talk, that we are a self-organizing group, and everything that the steering group does migrates its way across the Kanban board, and we are team working agreements, and just really trying to put Agile in practice. We also have some very lovely sponsors like VACO, Navigation Advertising, Nashville Technology Council, and Thanks, that together have helped us to support this group and have helped us get off the ground and make the things we do possible. So just a few little final announcements. We are looking for volunteers to join our leadership group that steers our organization. Again, you do not have to be Agile marketing savvy, as long as you are a passionate business Agilist and have interest in furthering that mission. So, we need people who can sell and, who can help with audio visual and PR and, user testing and just all kinds of things. We want to be cross-functional rather than just solely, the same kind of Agile marketing person. So I thought I'd also share with you, I'll be putting in the comments section of the chat a 24/7 comment box, because we do want feedback from folks. And if you'll look in the corner, we have a newly designed logo that our little guy is standing on. So AMP, and a little bit of a sound wave representing the Nashville sound aspect of things. So AMP for Agile Marketing Professionals. So enough of that stuff. We had Jennifer, Kristen, do you have anything that you would like to add before we turn the floor over to Melissa this evening?
Sure. Well, I just wanted to say hello. I'm part of the board of directors for Agile Denver. We've been a nonprofit Agile community for almost 11 years now. And one of the things that we started doing last year was mashups with local and international meetup groups. So I believe that Michelle and myself ended up getting together about 2 months ago, actually, and started the conversation. So we have both Agile Denver community members as well as the AMP community members. So we're glad to be here. And ironically, the speaker tonight is less than like 30 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. So that's kind of fun too. But thank you for having us.
No doubt. Well, thank you so much for being here. And, folks, if you have fun and you're meeting new connections, don't let this be the last time we all connect. I would encourage folks, to take these opportunities to, have some side conversations and get to know some of the other wonderful Agilists across the country. So it's been a great part of the fun. So now that we have had our announcements, I would love to introduce to you our delightful speaker, Melissa Reeve. Melissa has been a part of our Agile marketing community since, I'd say, what would we say, maybe last summer, roughly. Mm-hmm. Melissa is the Vice President of Marketing at Scaled Agile, Inc., which is in Boulder, Colorado. Many of you may be familiar with Scaled Agile and the SAFE framework that they have developed. Melissa and her team, the team that she guides, is out there helping the world to really understand how you go about scaling Agile and all of the lean principles and the diversity, all the wonderful things that the SAFE framework was developed on. So in addition to that, Melissa received her bachelor's degree in Japanese literature and language from WashU in St. Louis. So really reflecting some of that diversity that Scaled Agile talks so much about, as being so important to their culture. So she didn't mention any worm farming, but I would say that certainly reflects a creative superpower talent. So I believe that she mentioned that she does live in Boulder, Colorado, where she lives with her husband and chickens and dogs. And if that were not enough just to prove to you all her total awesomeness, several of us in our Agile marketing community had the recent pleasure of participating in an 8-week book study on Saturday mornings that was Melissa was a part of. It was led by Jim Newell, incidentally, based on his book that came out in October, The 6 Disciplines of Agile Marketing. And it has been completely a pleasure to interact with Melissa over the last 8 weeks. I can definitely say with confidence that all of us that have experienced Melissa in that group have come to know her as not just an expert on scaling and about matters pertaining to Agile marketing, but just being a warm, giving leader. And it is our honor and privilege to have you here tonight. So I'd say domo arigato, Melissa-san, if you want to go ahead, and I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll let that party get started.
What a great introduction from somebody who exudes the Nashville warmth. And it's such an honor to be here tonight. And I thank everybody who's on the call, because I always feel like anybody who extends their day to learn and sit on yet another Zoom call just deserves all the kudos in the world. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to put this presentation into presenter mode. It looks like we've got the notes version, so I'll switch the display, and we will be off and running here. So people management in the 21st century. This, even though it says people management in the 21st century, I really want folks to know that it's geared toward an Agile audience. And one of the most frequent questions I get asked, and actually the journey I had to go on, was figuring out how to be a people manager within an Agile environment. It's not the easiest thing to figure out. So this takes us on the journey of why organizations are the way they are, and then how Agile is changing organizations, and then what it means to be a people manager within an Agile organization. So thanks for coming on the journey with me. So, again, muting, I see everybody's muting, video on if you can. I get it. It's a long day. We all have video fatigue, but it does kind of help me feel like I'm not talking to a wall as much as you can during these sessions. And then please make use of the chat and we'll have a dialogue. Michelle, if you can help monitor the chat, I am more than willing to stop and field questions. I feel like it's more of a dialogue that way. And it's not just me, again, monologuing about this thing. So feel free to make use of the chat and use it as back channel. Compare notes. We're here to learn from each other. So share your experiences in the chat. It'll make a rich experience for all of us. So Michelle Yells just gave the beautiful introduction. I have nothing else to say. And so our flow for today is taking a look at how we got here. And sorry, I'm just rearranging a couple windows here. So how did we get here? I call it a zippy history of the last 150 years of management theory and how the status quo is no longer serving us. So what do we need to do today to change management? And then what are those 7 attributes of modern managers? So how did we get here? A lot of people on this call, my guess is, know about Frederick Winslow Taylor, or he's also known as Taylorism. He's the father of Taylorism. And the backstory here is in the late 1800s. Just picture yourself in the Industrial Revolution, and people are getting scientific about everything, and they're studying everything, trying to figure out how to optimize it. And along comes Frederick Winslow Taylor, and he starts to optimize the science of management. And he says, let's figure out the best way to manage people. And he comes out with this book, The Principles of Scientific Management. And he says that there's one best way for things to operate, and it's the manager's duty to find that one best way. And I want you to hang on to that, because we're going to see traces of that in our environments today. So just a couple other people who were involved in scientific management theory. There's something called bureaucratic management, and that says that this is Max Weber. He says there's rules of bureaucracy, and then the manager should also focus on the scientific theory, which we just talked about. And then the manager is responsible for the flow of information within the organization. So tuck that one away too, as you think about transparency, alignment. How did we get to this place where the management holds all the knowledge? Then we have Henri Fayol. So the French during this time are actually taking a lead in this area of scientific management. And they are diving in, and we have Henri Fayol, who says that the role of the manager is to plan, organize, command, coordinate, control. What about that whole command and control thing? I think we've heard about that. So if you wonder where the origins of that was, turn to Henri, and he has this administrative management theory. So then we go into these studies of what I call the numbers people, which are the people like Taylor and Henri Fayol, who are looking to really optimize the output. And then there's what we call the people. So the people are the ones who say, it's not just about optimizing process, but maybe there's something to optimizing the environment in which people work. So in 1924, we had the Hawthorne studies, and the Hawthorne studies, this is a picture from the Hawthorne studies. And you can see, I don't know why there's all ladies here. Don't ask me that. And I don't quite know what they're producing, but you can see other elements there. So you see the windows, you see the fans, and what they would do is they would start tweaking the elements. They'd make it hot, or they'd make it cold, or they'd make it dark, or they'd improve the lighting, all trying to figure out what was it that would change the environment and really make these people produce faster? What can we do to improve the human conditions? Well, unfortunately, they told these ladies that they were being studied. And so no matter what they did, the ladies agreed ahead of time what their productivity was going to be for the day. And they just produced that much. So really what they found out was there was something that you can still find in academic literature today called the Hawthorne Effect. And it's based on this study. And it says that if people know they're being studied, that then they will skew the study, which is why we have these double-blind studies today. So they found out attention matters, that people matters, and it's your attitude, the worker's attitude that matters. Because again, no matter what they did to the environment, it was how the ladies were feeling that day and what they set as their target that really ended up affecting the outcome of their productivity for that day. Okay, so then we move into the post-World War II era. And we have Peter Drucker here, and there's a shift. So with Taylorism, you had this almost classism that happened. You had the working class or the laboring class, and then you had the management class. And again, the management class had the one best way of doing things. And Peter Drucker comes in after World War II and says, instead of having power over the people, let's have power with the people. And so workers will be the most productive if they motivate themselves and solve problems on their own. Well, this meshed well with that period after World War II, because it was a period of great prosperity. So there was a lot of kind of positive energy going. There was a lot of growing wealth. There was a decline in the union labor tensions that put a lot of those worker protections in place prior to World War II. The unions were very strong, but there wasn't a lot of friction. There was kind of this 2 decades of good spirits between corporations. You know, they were there to support the people. And then Drucker also said that managers should have objectives and manage according to those objectives versus finding that one true way that Taylorism had really supported. So that lasted, you know, for 20 years, but right around 1963, you start to see the return of what they were calling the greater Taylorism. So this is the bean counters sharpening their pencils again, trying to say, hey, can we find the one best way of doing this? How do we optimize the corporation? So you have the emergence of the Boston Consulting Group, which was the first big consultancy. So you think of them as the predecessors to big consultancies like Deloitte or Accenture that exist today. And they're analyzing every aspect of a company, trying to find that corporate strategy. Where is this company strong? What do they excel at? How do we optimize it? And they cared a little bit less about the environment in which people were working. Then in the 1980s to today, you had this emergence that the role of management is to create wealth for shareholders. Now, I know that feels a little bit strange, at least it felt strange to me, because this is what I've grown up with. I just grew up with this thought that the role of management is to create wealth for shareholders. So it didn't even really occur to me that there was this period from like the 1950s to the late 70s where the role of the corporation was to support the worker. And of course, we saw that in the company supporting workers for their entire life. And you think about it, that started to change in the 1980s, where you had these mass layoffs. You had the corporate raiders who were having hostile takeovers of companies. And, you know, I've got this picture of Carl Icahn, who would go in and do a hostile takeover of a board and then try and create wealth for the shareholders. And I personally see legacy remnants of this today in these boards and in the maximization of the wealth for the shareholders at the cost of the people. But again, we see this tension between the numbers people and the people. So even though there were the numbers people and the people like Carl Icahn, there were also the people. So people like Peters and Waterman, and they said, let's celebrate the role of the humans in making companies successful. And it's really how you treat people that will make your company successful. Tom Peters is known as saying soft is hard. And they wrote the book In Search of Excellence. I don't know, does anybody remember that book? I kind of do. I don't know if I actually read it, but I do have loose memories of it. So I want to set up this dynamic of the numbers people and the people's people versus the people, because I feel like Agile is really trying to optimize both sides of that. Like, let's have our metrics and let's have our OKRs and let's make sure we're measuring things, but then let's also bring in the people side of it, the honoring our humanity, the law of 2 feet, and maybe, we will find out, Agile is this marriage of the people and the numbers people. All right, so what do we need for today? Do we need the people? Do we need the numbers people? Where are we at? And of course, we have Clayton Christensen. I think he just recently passed, Harvard professor of management. And he says, if you only do what worked in the past, you'll wake up and one day find that you've been passed by. So there's a third element going on here. And that element is innovation. And how do we optimize, not necessarily for the wealth of the shareholder, but how do we optimize for innovation? And the reason why we want to optimize for innovation is because that is the one thing that cannot be outsourced. So we can outsource legal contracting. We can outsource and get artificial intelligence for accounting. But can we, and there might be people on this call that say, hey, I know of an instance, but I don't know for sure that we can outsource innovation. So how do we unlock that spark? How do we free that, as this says, free the spark from the organization's title pull from doing the same old thing? Because entropy kicks in, and you've got to stay innovative to stay competitive. All right, so let's turn now to this study from 2005 from HP that took a look, and they said, let's study this and let's look at those enablers to innovation. What allows an organization to stay innovative? And they said it's highly skilled people, it's a helping culture, it's management support, it's using checkpoints to provide focus, and it's interdisciplinary people working together. Well, doesn't that sound a lot like Agile? So Agile says we've got motivated, quality-focused teams. We've got collaboration. We've got servant leadership, which sounds a little bit like management support. We've got sprints, which sound like checkpoints to provide focus. And interdisciplinary people working together sounds an awful lot like a cross-functional team. So Michelle, you've just popped a comment there into the chat, and it's about time for me to get a sip of water. Anyway, you want to share what your thoughts are?
All right, making sure I'm unmuted before I go off. Well, just as you were talking about optimizing for customers versus optimizing based on a long history of prioritizing what's good for the business and maximizing shareholder value. One of the reasons that I love customer experience management, which is kind of my particular specialty area, is that in general, when you do things that are for the good of the customer and make the experience for the customer easier, more pleasant, and just you are really, looking to be intentional about meeting their needs, I see in most cases that's really good for business. Customers want to keep doing business with you, and they will come back and do business with you again because you were easy and pleasant to work with. And just, as kind of said in the chat, it's one of those things that, in my experience, all boats rise together when you invest in the customer experience. I don't know that I believe that that's frequently the case when you are primarily trying to maximize like shareholder dividends, as an example.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that is a modern way of thinking, right? Is if we can optimize for the customer experience. And of course, Amazon is the most cited example of somebody who's just relentlessly focused on the customer experience, then shareholder value will follow. And I'm sure there are many, many more examples of that. So thanks for bringing that into the conversation. All right, so here we are. We did our zippy history of 150 years of management theory. Hopefully that was ringing some bells as you're like, oh, I've worked for a company that had command and control, or I worked for a company where the management thought they had the one best way. And then we transitioned into this notion that innovation is really where the focus is, that innovation, that customer experience. And that the things that are the enablers to innovation also map very well to Agile. All right, so now let's transition into these 7 attributes of a modern manager. And by a modern manager, I really mean an Agile manager. Because again, this is an area I see people struggle with. Not only people who are managers, imagine, and I can imagine because I've lived this journey. So when I was in college, I was taught about Taylorism. That's how I learned management. And I did learn that managers had the one best way. Sure, I learned coaching. Sure, I learned some other aspects of management. But then when I got thrown into an Agile environment as a people manager, I really didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make the transition. And the resources of, well, you'll just support other people now, didn't give me enough direction. So I offer this up, not only because it was my journey, but because you might be managed by somebody in an Agile environment that also might be in my shoes, that doesn't know the way. And of course, we all are in a position to manage up. And by listening to these 7 attributes and seeing what might map to your environment, you might get some ideas on how either you can better manage or you can manage up, or share these ideas within your organization. All right, so the first thing you can do is exhibit transparency and an open environment. And at the bottom, you'll see that I said it's that simple and it's that hard. Because it's simple to put these things on a slide and say, oh yeah, just go do this. But what does that really mean? It means that you've got to create this culture where you're willing to share even the information that might feel confidential. And it's funny, I just had a situation today where we have Slack channels, and I was part of a Slack channel. And somebody kicked me out of the Slack channel and said, this is a private Slack channel, and you can no longer be part of it. And I thought, gosh, this feels weird. And it was, I understand the motivation is they said, well, this is a team channel and we want a private space, safe space where we can communicate with each other. And yet the inside Agile part of me really cringed because it felt like it went against everything we stand for in terms of transparency and openness and alignment, and that those law of 2 feet. Hey, if you want to be in this meeting and you really feel like you have something to contribute, or what you will hear here will better enable you to do your job, you are welcome to attend. And so I'm currently actually still in conversation with these folks, because culture is, one definition of culture is all the little decisions that you make that add up to the bigger environment. And while this is one small decision, do you invite people into your Slack channel or not? If you had everybody in the organization taking that viewpoint of, you can't be in my private Slack channel, And again, this Slack channel, there is nothing confidential happening in this Slack channel. But if you have the whole organization doing that, all of a sudden you have gone against this, this tenet of exhibiting transparency and an open environment. And as a people manager, it is your job to engender this environment. And as somebody who may not be a people manager, you're in a position to remind folks that a modern manager exhibits transparency because we don't know where good ideas are going to emerge from. And so we've got to be open, and we've got to be sharing ideas and thoughts and knowledge with everybody. All right. So this goes right into this next one, which is creating a safe space for information sharing and ideation. So yeah, let's launch an AMP Slack channel, huh? And let's invite everybody. So information sharing and ideation. And again, I want to go back to the Taylorism and the one best way, because I think we've all worked for somebody like this. And at times I know that I've been this person, which says, you know, an idea comes up and the first thing you think of is why that idea won't work. Well, all of a sudden we've created a non-psychologically safe space for ideas to bubble up. And that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. So how do we, as people managers, create a safe space for that information sharing? How do we create that psychological safety? So Kim, you just put a note in the chat. You want to share with the group?
Hey, just had to unmute. Yeah, so, you know, there's power differentials, no matter how lovely and how agile an organization is. And so it's super important for the teams to have space if they want that space to themselves, right? There's a reason why it's team only in retrospective, right? We're open and transparent, but leaders are not welcome in retrospectives, right? It's for the team, for them and what they want to improve on. And the same thing can go with a Slack channel. Is psychologically, a leader's in a position of power. So it doesn't matter how great everyone's getting along and whatnot, that's still there. And it's great for them to have a space where they can talk and discuss. Just like CEOs and VPs and all those folks, when they're having meetings, not the whole entire company is not welcome, right? We're still going to be open and transparent with what the rest of the company needs to know, what would be helpful for them to know, but it's not helpful for everyone to be there who might not understand the conversation, right? Or might misunderstand the conversation, or maybe we have to hold back and not say what we really need to say because of the different participants in the room. So I think a lot of leaders miss this. Right? They go from, I'm not going to say anything to anyone. And then they kind of get into that agile space of like, oh, well, then I need to hear everything from everyone. It's like, well, that's not what open and transparent means, at least not to me anyway. So.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that into the conversation. Who else has some thoughts on that? Because that is, and who maybe has also tried to walk that line between allowing safe spaces and creating safe spaces and yet trying to get that information to flow.
I can say something about that.
How about Sherry, then Wayne?
Sounds
just
good.
Quick, just to follow on what Kim was saying, specific to retros on a team level, I watched my team behave completely different when there was leadership there. And it was not an effective retro. It kind of flopped. So that's the only thing I have to share, is that I fully experienced how people just kind of freeze up and they don't feel free to share.
Nice, thanks. And Wayne?
Yeah, a big part of it is the corporate culture. I've worked in a couple different industries, from construction and so forth, but two of them, I was also in the space shuttle program for a number of years, and also nuclear power production. In those two industries right there, was really no line between the, well, it was limited, but management upper management and stuff and the actual people doing the jobs. And the difference was the culture that they developed. We had to be transparent. We were dealing with safety issues that most companies never even touch. But they made the decision that no matter what, if you had any kind of questions about anything, if you had a concern about anything, you brought it to the forefront right away, and you were not under any kind of scrutiny or any kind of, what's called payback or whatever, if you brought something up, and it worked. They actually had a program in the place as part of the correction action program, which anybody could stop an operation, if they didn't feel it was safe. And if you didn't bring it up or weren't open about it or transparent about it, that was when the penalties came in, where they'd discuss it with you. But it was an interesting situation being in those industries. It's out there, but in coaching, management and stuff, if you can relate to them, the reason for it, a lot of times that breaks down the problems associated with transparency.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing is, and I keep learning too, is that really there's a place for both. And what we have to do is accommodate both, because we do need information to flow within the organization, and recognizing people are humans, and not everybody is comfortable sharing and walking up to the front of the room, even if it is culturally acceptable. And so how do you create those multiple communication channels? So, like you're saying, Sherry and Kim, with the retrospective, that's a great place for people who maybe feel safest sharing within their team. And I have been in retrospectives where even within the team, people don't feel comfortable sharing, right? You're always going to have those people who, gosh, if I have to put a sticky where people recognize my handwriting in the front of the room, I'm not going to put a sticky up. But if I could do something anonymously, then I will share it. So thinking about all of those factors as we're thinking about how do we create this safe space for information sharing and ideation. So it looks like, Kim, you wrote, I'm curious about Kristen's experience with this from her past experience in Raleigh. Kristen, are you still there?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
It's hard to answer this question because I was in a different position than maybe some folks know. So I was a person who was on the road a lot. So I was on site with customers. I wasn't actually in the Boulder office that often, other than a few happy hours and some lunch get-togethers to keep the team alive. But I would say from a coaching on the road, it was difficult for us to even separate that, because every time we had an opportunity to chat, it was usually over the phone. We didn't use a whole lot of online tools like Slack and FlowDoc and things like that, because we craved physical contact so much from being on the road that we would prefer to actually talk one-on-one with each other and then try to bring it back. Now, what we did put in place, because we were always on the road, and I think that because of our current situation where everybody's working from home and they're also craving that, we actually created a 1 week a year where we flew all of our coaches into the Boulder office and we spent a week together. We would talk about our clients. We would talk about all the artifacts that we created. We would talk about the experiments we were doing with different customers. And so it was always open to whoever would listen because we craved that attention. So there was no barrier between what you can talk about here versus what you can talk about there. As far as in the office, we used FlowDoc, which is a competitor to Slack. And so a lot of the conversations, yes, they had certain channels that were specifically for team members, but they also had other ones that are water cooler channels, things like that, where you're just kind of walking through the halls virtually to chat. So I don't know that it was necessarily any better or different than any other company, especially right now in the last year. But we definitely had conversations that were isolated to certain individuals where it was appropriate, because it's the level of conversation that you need. And also Dunbar's number of how many people do you really want to put in a single conversation or channel virtually to get something useful out of it. So it really depends on what you're talking about, and then define what's the right audience to have those conversations. But I think that's all working agreements. You have to work it out together.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that, Kristen. All right, so we're creating safe space for information sharing and ideation. And then people management, you're holding yourself accountable. And, an easy one about this is time. I have worked for, we've all worked for different types of managers. And there's the difference between a people manager who shows up consistently 5 or 10 minutes late to a meeting, doesn't really let you know. You're sitting there wondering, is it going to be 5 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Is this happening? Did they get totally sidetracked? Or then there's the people managers I've worked for who it's 1 minute after and they say, hey, I'm going to be 5 minutes late. And the communication is there and they're respecting your time. They're respecting the time box. That's the difference between somebody who's holding themselves accountable or not. Another way that I love to see leaders hold themselves accountable is admitting when they're wrong, and that is, it gets harder when you invest yourself into your ideas, when you think that maybe you've got the answer and you've spent a lot of time socializing your ideas with other people, getting input, and then you go to test it and you're like, oh crap, that didn't work. Which of course speaks to the very heart of Agile, which is how do we not get so invested in our own ideas? How do we test things incrementally so that we don't have to back off an idea that doesn't work? Any other ideas on people or thoughts on how you've seen people managers hold themselves accountable?
I had a chief scrum master that would, on a very regular basis, do failure vows. From, they seem like fairly minor infractions, but it really turned heads, and it really created a completely different atmosphere. Mm-hmm. It allowed for people to say that's okay, and it created an environment, and people were proud to bring to, oh, I messed up. So then by modeling that behavior, you saw that throughout the organization.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Failure vows. What else? Yeah, we used to have what we called the horse's ass award. So if you found yourself being the horse's ass, then we literally had the back end of a horse and you would get a trophy with that. And that went around the office as a way of holding each other accountable to one of our core values, which is respect for people and culture. All right. Another one of the 7 traits is openness to change. Do you have that fixed mindset? Do you have the growth mindset? So and I want to be clear here that this is not an either or. There are times that I have an incredible growth mindset, and there are times that I have a fixed mindset. So one of the fixed mindset is when I'm frustrated, I give up. I suck at reading instructions, and I open a box, I dive in, I expect to figure it out. And if I get frustrated, I hand it over to my husband, who loves reading instructions. And then there's times that I have an incredible growth mindset. I love to try new things, except if somebody maybe gave me a cockroach to eat, I wouldn't like that. So I just want to toss this out there that fixed and growth mindsets aren't like I'm all one or I'm not the other, but it is being aware of when you're being fixed and when you have a growth mindset, and thinking about how appropriate it is to the situation at hand. And that as leaders, part of our charter is to exhibit this openness to change. And how does that look? Well, you're in a meeting, maybe as a leader, oftentimes you're the last to speak, but maybe sometimes you set the context for the meeting. And you said, hey, based on all the input that I've got to date, I think we should go in direction X. And somebody, because we have an open environment of sharing, somebody says, well, I think that we should go direction Y because of these 3 things. And all of a sudden you have a healthy dialogue, and it becomes clear that maybe you didn't have the full information, or the information presented at hand has shifted your viewpoint. And that's what we're talking about when we model openness to change. That as a leader, we're not just defending our position until the last moment, because we don't have the one best way. So Michelle, you said, curious to what extent folks utilize TWAs in their teams. I don't even know if I know what a TWA is.
Team working agreements.
Oh, team working agreement. Thank you.
I was too lazy to type it. I'm sorry.
So maybe just in the chat here, rather than going off mute, you can put like a +1 in the chat if you use team working agreements. And maybe even a number of percentage of the time, yeah, coaching working agreements. I feel like, yes, in certain circumstances, and those circumstances for me generally be if it's a bigger group that where the stakes are high. I think the higher the stakes, the more you need team working agreements, and the bigger group, you need the working agreements. But, the more established the team, hopefully you've done that maybe once, and not that you don't revisit them, but that you've established that baseline. So you won't need to necessarily go through them every time. I'm thinking, your daily stand-ups, your retrospectives, establish a baseline and work from that and revisit them from time to time. All right, supporting the diversity of thought. So, there's a reason why we use the stickies in Agile, and it's because it does help bring more voices to the surface, and that you as a people leader, again, contrasting that Taylorism, that command and control, the history of management, that instead of coming into the room as the manager saying, hey, I've got the answers, or this is what we, quote unquote, the leadership have decided, really using much more tentative language. This is the direction that we are heading, based on the information we have at hand, and really trying to elicit from people who may have more interaction with the customer, who might have a broader view. Michelle, you talked about that customer's experience and going across the silos. Somebody who goes across the silos would have a very different viewpoint, maybe from somebody who just sees one aspect of the situation, and vice versa. And being open to that diversity of thought and really trying to surface that so that we can see where the trends are. Yeah, and again, with innovation, this is oftentimes where it's happened. And I'd be interested, just put raise your hand or put something in the chat if you have an example of this. But has anybody had that experience where you're doing a retrospective or you're doing a brainstorm and you get a lot of clustering around a certain idea or group of ideas, and then there's this one sticky that's way off in the corner? And it's an idea that nobody's thought of. And it probably wouldn't have surfaced because the person who put it up there is somebody who doesn't love interrupting the loud voices in the room, who maybe isn't super comfortable even sharing that idea, but they happen to put that sticky up. And then as soon as everybody sees that sticky, they're like, that's it. That's the thing we've been waiting for. And Sherry, you want to share your experience?
A very, very quiet team member. She's very good at her job. She was closest to the customers, and she is the person that had the most information and the closest experience to the customer. And but she would be very quiet in meetings, absolutely brilliant. And she would write one little thing down, and all of us are like chatting and, creating all this chaos, talking over each other. And they see that and they're like, yep. And so she became like this, like silent leader in that regard. Like it was always spot on. And she just sat there silently looking at us like we're all crazy and simply wrote something down and put it out there.
Yeah.
And it was just a regular theme.
That's awesome. And that's really the goal. And how can we as people manager really support that diversity of thought, get those ideas out there, help people build on each other. And that's our new role. It's not to come into the room with the answers, but to enable the answers to surface. And then kind of related to that, engendering this continuous learning environment. So the definition of a learning organization, and this is Peter Senge, so the 5 disciplines, for anybody who's familiar with him or wants to look it up, is where people continuously expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning to see the whole together. I love that last one, where people are continually learning to see the whole together. Because at the end of the day, no one person has all the information. And so we've got to continuously learn, and we're doing it here. I mean, I've already learned a couple of things from you. Thank you for that. And we're learning from each other. You know, everybody has a different point of view, a different viewpoint. The other way, just on a tactical level that I've seen this really transpire nicely is in pairing. And we're in the marketing organization, and there's kind of this feeling that graphic designers are their own beast, and you need a special hat or a special talent to be a graphic designer. And, you know, yeah, T-shaped skills, whatever, but I'll never be a graphic designer. But amazing things happen when we start to pair people with the graphic designers. One, we get better graphic design because the graphic designer better understands maybe a business point of view, maybe better understands the customer. And then what also happens is that the person pairing with the graphic designer starts to understand how a graphic designer thinks. And all of a sudden that thinking starts to influence their thinking, and they're coming up with better ideas, and they're starting to innovate together. And that cross-pollination is where the magic starts to happen. So I'd be curious, I mean, that's in a marketing environment. Has anybody experienced something similar in a different environment? So Michelle, you put in paired writing.
Yeah, I don't have firsthand experience of doing it, but you know, for the software development world, where like with extreme programming, how two developers are actually working together on code. I've read in several places about paired writing for content development, which could take a couple different forms. You might have a subject matter expert sitting down at one computer with someone who's very skilled at copywriting. Or it could be actually two writers, and one of them is kind of editing along as the other is writing, and then they alternate, and it kind of help each other get unstuck if the words aren't flowing, or writer's block, or trying to get a concept that get it clear, working together to create that copy. So.
Yeah, I love it. In fact, we're redoing our website right now, and we're doing paired writing because there's a couple of people who know the style guide really well, but they can't rewrite. There's not enough capacity for them to rewrite the entire website. So they're pairing together with other people who can write or are the subject matter experts. And then they can, as the copy is being drafted, they can come in with the style guide. So we don't just have a big batch at the end where everybody's having to review the content all at once. In the context of a people manager, so I want you to think about, how do you create this culture of continuous learning on your team through small actions like pairing, through big actions like making sure people are staying up to date on the latest innovations in their field. How do you send them to conferences? How do you, even virtual conferences, how do you make sure that they're carving out the time? And as a people manager, that was one of the most difficult things. I set aside time, I set aside budget for people, and everybody wants to learn, but the pressures of day to day are so rigorous that it actually took a conscious effort, a conscious dialogue to get people to commit to the time to learn. And of course, once they did, all of a sudden new ideas were locked. We moved the organization forward, but it is a conscious effort. All right. And last, and I say this is most important, serve as a role model. I'm pausing here because this was one of those things that when a coach was trying to coach me on being a more agile people manager, they'd say, well, serve as a role model. And I'd say, well, what the hell does that mean? And I kind of got it, embody the agile mindset. But when you're a manager and you're still trying to figure out what agile is all about, and they want you to model this behavior, it's really hard. And it took a while for me to figure out that, I'm in, 40 meetings a week. And in those 40 meetings a week, that's my opportunity through all these other behaviors we've been talking about to create the safe environment, to make sure all ideas were heard, to create or support diversity of thought, to inject opportunities for continuous learning. And that, it wasn't a specific point in time, but much like we talked about culture being all these little decisions that add up, it was all those little behaviors and all the ways that I interacted with people, whether it be in a meeting or be in a hall or be in a one-on-one, that was adding up to this one, to serve as a role model. And I'll return to the bottom where it says it's that simple and it's that hard, because we all have good days, we all have bad days, and it's hard to be consistent all the time. So if we can forgive each other, including our leaders, and not expect for perfection, that will go a long way to creating that environment that we want. So with that, I do want to go back to Wayne's comment here. He asked, how does continuous learning compare to continuous improvement programs? Who wants to field that one? Kim, I kind of want to call on you.
I know there's lots of agile coaches here, so.
Yeah. Or maybe someone we haven't heard from. Brenda, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here, but I've got nothing to add. I'm just kind of hanging around listening, trying to learn.
All right.
Wayne, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on your question so we have some context around it? It might help us to come up with some answers for you.
Okay. When I'm saying continuous improvement, a lot of companies have a formal program for this. Well, they'll have meetings, they'll have people come in for classes and so forth. And you're trying to improve your product constantly. But once again, what I believe the difference is maybe that a formal program that these companies have is basically like a structured program, whereas continuous learning is more taking place more at the individual level. I'm guessing at that. That's what I was trying to get an answer on.
Yeah. So Carl, we see you again. Did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. And I think for us, continuous improvement is centered around our retrospectives and inspect and adapt those sessions where we try to improve from the previous iteration, where we try to improve on what we have done in the past. One of the most challenging phrases I hear on a regular basis, where we've always done it this way. And we're trying to get people out of that mindset. So I think it goes back to your growth mindset slide that you put up. For us, continuous improvement is trying to get better and more efficient on how we deliver. Like I said, I'm in the hotel business, so trying to improve, going from opening a hotel in 18 months to 14 months. So that's continuous improvement. How can we streamline the process? When it comes to continuous learning, and actually also doing assessments and those measurements, those metrics are also part of continuous improvement. When it comes to continuous learning, it's more on the educational side. We do a lot of lunch and learns. We also have a lot of communities of practice where we share ideas from one team to the other. I also tend, like in sessions like this, any meetup groups where you can actually learn more information about what's going on in our industry. I look at always enhancing my craft. I look at coaching to be a craft and not a skill. Actually, a combination of the two, but it's also a craft that I need to work on 24/7, because there's no such thing as being a perfect agile coach or a perfect scrum master or a perfect product owner. We continuously have to learn and enhance those skills and that craft on a regular basis. So reading blogs, writing articles, doing posts in LinkedIn and other social media avenues is where I focus, where I think we get a lot of the continuous learning aspect. And it also means informal training. Getting those certifications that we have, especially like in the IC Agile Marketing Certification or the Leadership Certification, or even down to the Agile Transformation for elements and teams and organizations. So that's more of the formal learning process, but there's a lot of informal learning processes that you can have out there as well.
Does that help, Wayne?
Yeah, that's a good explanation of it.
Great, thanks for that, Carl. So Michelle, I just wanted to check in. Yeah, we got Kim needs to drop, and I know that we're tight on the time box here. I've kind of just tried to integrate some of the Q&A time into this. Do you want me to do a hard stop at 6, or just if people need to leave, they can leave and just kind of keep going?
So folks are welcome to hang out if they want to longer. We do have a few things that we'd like to share at the end. So do folks have a few more questions? Would it make sense for me to make a couple announcements? Do people want to stay on for a while? What's the temperature in the room? Here's another way of putting it too. Does anyone have a question or a comment and they've just been waiting to get it in? And if we were to move into wrap up later tonight, you'd be like, man, I just wish I would have said that one thing. I just didn't get the chance. I'd hate to have that happen to you.
I just have one more thing really to add to the kind of continuous learning, continuous improvement. I think for me, the continual learning is about maintaining that kind of customer focus and kind of continuing to gather data, and improvement is in context. So something may be, an improvement in the context that you're working in, but as you learn more and you gather more information from the customer and the context may change, then, improvement may not necessarily be linear. It's about creating something that's better in the context of the customer or in the market.
Great. Thanks for that, Lyndon. So just to kind of bring this in, I'm going to just do this build here. Oops. There's a couple of things that might serve as blocks or barriers to you integrating these 7 aspects of agile people management in the 21st century. So one is that it does you can see it runs in sharp contrast to that traditional management. There could be a fear of speaking up, like, I have people who either I'm a manager and I see that the manager above me, because we all have somebody above us, even if we're in a leadership position, is not embracing these agile qualities, then who am I to speak up to that person? That's that power imbalance that we talked about earlier. I know I had this one, which was feeling like it isn't enough. So again, coming from that Taylorism, coming from that one best way, coming from a command and control, and think about a manager and who might have come up through management ranks in the 70s or 80s, and they're still a manager. Maybe they're a VP, maybe they're a CEO by now. and you tell them these are the things you have to do, and they're like, that doesn't feel like management. That doesn't feel like enough. Then there's some people who want to control or conduct, and it's a habit that they have to break, or they're maybe just used to the way their old management style was, or it doesn't feel safe to embrace a new way of working. So those are some of the blocks that you might encounter when you look inside. Watch out for these types of blocks, or if you are reporting into somebody who maybe doesn't seem to embrace these things, maybe having a little bit of empathy for what they're going through. So all this boils down to basically being a servant leader, right? And being a servant leader is being that servant first. So it begins with that natural feeling of one that wants to serve. I want to serve you, as opposed to wanting power or influence or fame or wealth. And Dylan, thanks for joining us. I think she had to drop off. So just know that if it feels like you're Sisyphus here going uphill, pushing a rock uphill, you are. You've got over 150 years of management theory that is keeping you from adopting this new way of managing people. And that's what I got. Thanks for hanging out and sticking in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. This was truly delightful. And I hope that everyone across our two organizations, that we were able to find just a common interest among all of that wisdom there. Very, very applicable. So it's just lovely to have you.